You have more power than you think. The reason I think we struggle to believe this or just downright ignore it is because we imagine power to come in the forms we see in the media. Some superhuman mutant spewing lava from their hands, or a warrior with an axe turning the tide in a battle with one flick of his wrist. Or maybe a tech guru overnight upending an industry. All delivered to us through the high-def screens of our personal digital devices in our pockets. These lofty and fantastical examples of power are not how I have experienced my own personal power, my ability to affect change in my own life. I'm here today to talk to you about hyperstimulating digital media, the impact that it had on me, and the transformational journey of healing I've been on since I started addressing this relationship 5 years ago. And when I say hyperstimulating digital media, or HSDM for short, I'm referring primarily to pornography. However, the realizations I've had about pornography can just as easily be applied to excessive social media use, excessive and habitual watching of hyper-violent media, or excessive gaming. The reason I use the word hyperstimulating is that these forms of media differ to traditional or normal forms of media in a distinct way. And this difference makes them more similar to hyperstimulating substances than traditional media. The difference being that normal or traditional media has as its imperative the delivery of information, ideas, thoughts, whereas hyperstimulating media, much like hyperstimulating substances like drugs or alcohol, have as their emphasis the delivery of a feeling. And it's the association of this feeling with the themes that exist in the media that lead to unintended consequences. Consequences in the way the brain becomes wired, and thus how we even perceive reality. As I started to speak about the challenges I was facing, more and more people secretly confided in me that they too had had some or all of the symptoms I was describing. And so the reason I'm sharing this information with you and the reason I went on this healing journey is not because of some lofty moral drive to be a good person or even to be a better person, but simply because the neuroscience I discovered behind the impact this media was having on my body and my brain in particular made sense. That and the realization of the negative impact it was having on the relationships in my life. And this led me to heal this dynamic. I have encountered many valid and convincing arguments advocating the reduction of exposure to pornography and other forms of HSDM. However, the moral argument was never enough to help me in the moment-to-moment opportunities to change behavior. And so I'm going to share with you the information and logic that did. Because I didn't have this information, I developed a lot of the symptoms associated with long-term use of HSDM. Intrusive thoughts and images, sometimes sexual, sometimes violent, but always inappropriate to the moment. A distorted understanding of sex, intimacy, my body's own development, as well as an inability to set healthy personal boundaries. So, what was the information that helped me heal myself? Well, in order to go there, we need to set the stage, because just in my case, and in so many others, this starts in adolescence. Adolescence, which is said to start at age 14 and through to age 24, has as its developmental goal the shifting of the primary point of support from parents to peers. And in order to do this, the adolescent body goes through an astounding myriad of changes. Changes in IQ, explosions in EQ, and a dramatic increase in their physical resilience. However, for the emphasis of this talk, I'm going to be picking up on the change in the adolescent brain hormone dopamine. Now, anytime we have new experiences or tackle challenges and complete them, or take a risk that ends well, we're left with this feeling of satisfaction, of bliss, contentedness, of peace, release. And the presence of this feeling in the body is noted by the presence of dopamine in the brain. And the adolescent body does an incredibly ingenious thing. It lowers the average baseline level of dopamine in the brain. That is the day-to-day average level of dopamine. In fact, a 14-year-old's level of dopamine is lower than that of an 8-year-old. And what does this mean? Well, it confirms what we know to be true about teenagers. They get bored. They have an insatiable drive to get out into the world, to have new experiences, tackle challenges, and gain awareness. And it's this developmental itch, this lower dopamine level, which is experienced as boredom, which sends them out into the world to take risks, to develop the skills they will need as they rely less on their parents and more on their peers. Skills like collaboration, negotiation, impulse control, self-regulation, conflict management, essential, crucial skills. So, it's a logical picture. Adolescents need to become adults. The brain lowers the baseline dopamine level in order to catalyze this developmental itch, which results in adolescents going out into the world and developing skills that they'll need as adults. Happily ever after. Well, not quite. With the advent of high-speed internet, as well as the now almost ubiquitous access anyone with a smartphone has to pornography and other forms of hyperstimulating digital media, there's a second option. It seems to require little or no risk, deals instantly with any uncomfortable emotional state, and doesn't cost anything. Well, not quite. So what did the habitual choosing and my habitual choosing of HSDM as an emotional coping strategy cost me? Well, it taught me that in order to shift an uncomfortable emotional state, I should isolate myself in secrecy and consume media whose themes were not in congruence with my personal values. Themes like violence, domination, subjugation, objectification. And this incongruence, because I didn't have anyone to talk to about it, engendered a sense of personal shame. Now, what I have gained since healing this dynamic is an increased ability to concentrate, an increased sense of self-esteem, an ability to set healthy personal boundaries, as well as an unnameable and completely unexpected deeper connection with my own innocence. And these are similar to the results that men have reported to me that I've worked with in the healing of their reduction of their relationship with HSDM. So what we know about the adolescent brain is that this hyperstimulating media causes a massive release of dopamine in the brain. So much so that the brain isn't able to absorb it. And its coping strategy is to decrease its ability to absorb any dopamine in an attempt to send a message to the body that says, whatever stimulation is coming in, it is way too much for me to process. Now, with the continued habitual choosing or using of HSDM as an emotional coping strategy, the brain is continually flooded with dopamine, and it continues to reduce its ability to absorb dopamine. This results in an even lower baseline dopamine level in the brain, and an increased developmental itch experienced as boredom. However, because there's been no concurrent skill development, the step-by-step, moment-to-moment, risk-taking opportunities to develop the skills, the risk of getting out into the world to develop the skills that are needed just seems way too great. And the option to retreat to an isolated and safe world of digital fantasy becomes more and more attractive. And this is the basis of addiction behavior, the continued choosing of an action that consistently yields negative results. What I found astounding about my healing of this dynamic in my life was that the more publicly I spoke about the challenges I was facing, the less inclined I was to use the media that I traditionally used as a coping strategy. And today is a continuation of standing up and breaking the shame and isolation that is associated to this crippling relationship. My hope is that this talk does not leave you with any answers. It has simply been a sharing of information, but rather that it invokes in you some deeper questions. Questions like, are you in an unhealthy relationship with hyperstimulating digital media? Do you need to talk to someone about it? Is your relationship with hyperstimulating digital media costing you a deeper level of connection with yourself, with your partner, with your children? And then to take that question to a deeper level and asking yourself, is it worth it? Because you have more power than you think. Thank you.